The first rays of morning sunlight slowly touch the white stone houses of a quiet Greek village. A gentle breeze drifts across the sparkling blue waters of the Aegean Sea. Olive trees sway softly upon the surrounding hills. The air smells of fresh bread, wild herbs, and the salty sea. Welcome to This Explainer. Tonight, we're going to journey back more than 2,000 years to the beautiful world of ancient Greece. Not to witness great battles, not to meet famous philosophers. Instead, we'll quietly discover the everyday lives of ordinary Greek families, the farmers, the fishermen, the potters, the shepherds, and the children whose peaceful routines quite literally shaped one of history's greatest civilizations.
Our story begins with a young olive farmer named Nikos. He's 20 years old and he lives with his parents, his grandmother, and his two younger sisters in a small white stone house overlooking the sea. Before sunrise, Nikos quietly wakes. The village remains peaceful. Honestly, only the distant sound of waves gently meeting the shore can be heard. His mother has already begun baking fresh barley bread, and that warm smell fills the little home. His father prepares woven baskets for gathering olives later that morning. Outside, goats slowly wander across the rocky hillside. A donkey patiently waits beside an old olive tree, and small fishing boats gently float upon the calm water. The village slowly begins to wake. Neighbors greet one another with warm smiles, children carry clay jars to the village well, and old fishermen prepare their simple wooden boats for another peaceful day at sea. There's no rush, only the gentle rhythm of ordinary life. As the golden sun climbs above the distant mountains, the white houses shine brightly beneath the clear blue sky. The olive groves stretch across the hills, and the sea sparkles like glass. Everything feels calm, everything feels timeless. For most people living in ancient Greece, life isn't filled with grand adventures. It's shaped by family, honest work, simple meals, and the quiet beauty of each new day. As another peaceful morning begins beside the Aegean Sea, our relaxing journey through the everyday life of ancient Greece gently begins.
Just imagine waking up tomorrow with absolutely no alarm clocks, no smartphones, and no supermarkets. Crazy, right? Well, for Nikos, there's no digital chime pulling him from sleep. Instead, his body has naturally learned the ancient rhythms of the earth. He rises before the sun simply because he knows that his family's survival depends entirely on his honest daily labor. I mean, it was literally that simple. No farming meant no bread, and no harvest meant hunger. Section 1. Before the sun rises, inside the Greek home. Let's step quietly inside Nikos' small home while the world outside is still dark. His siblings are dreaming peacefully beneath rough wool blankets, and the whole room smells just faintly of olive oil. Now, these homes were wonderfully simple, but they were incredibly practical. They were built around a central outdoor courtyard that acted as the true heart of all family activity. It was a place with a well for water, an altar to the gods, and a safe enclosed space for children to play. The walls themselves were often made from sun-dried mud bricks, complete with dirt floors and wooden roofs, and they actually had this brilliant architectural trick. They built small windows set very high up in the walls. This natural ventilation was explicitly designed to keep the harsh Mediterranean summer heat out while trapping the warmth inside during the cool winters. Pretty smart, right? What's really fascinating here is how the space inside the home was physically divided based on some pretty strict social rules. Around the courtyard were workrooms and bedrooms, but the space was highly gendered. Women generally stayed away from visiting men and often had a dedicated room called the gynekon. Meanwhile, the men had the andron. This was a specific room, sometimes with its own completely separate entrance from the street, dedicated solely for the men to host dinner parties and entertain their business associates, totally separated from the rest of the household. Okay, so before stepping outside into the cool morning air, Nikos needs fuel for the incredibly difficult day ahead. He sits down for akratisma, which is the traditional Greek breakfast. Now, this wasn't some extravagant feast. It often consisted simply of coarse barley bread, since wheat bread was usually reserved just for the rich, dipped in watered-down wine. Sounds a bit strange to us today, but this specific combination provided the immediate energy, strength, and stamina necessary for hours of intense agricultural labor. Sometimes, if the family was having a good week, they'd supplement it with goat's milk, olives, figs, or dried nuts. Now, you might be wondering, how exactly do we know all these intimate daily details today? Well, while archaeologists have definitely found ruins, coins, and weapons, it's actually the artwork, beautifully painted on ancient pottery, that acts as our greatest window into the past. Just take a look at the image on screen. It shows us exactly how ordinary people worked and how they dressed in their chitones. A chiton was basically a simple tunic made of a single rectangle of wool or linen cloth, fastened at the shoulder, belted at the waist, and worn by pretty much everyone. Section 2. Working land and sea. The rhythms of labor. As the deep blue sky turns a soft orange, Nikos gathers his wooden hoe and an iron-bladed sickle. He pauses briefly at a small family shrine to pray for rain and a safe day, and then takes the familiar, worn path out to his family's fields. Look at this magnificent piece of history right here. This pottery perfectly captures farmers just like Nikos at work. You can literally see them actively using long sticks to knock olives down from these ancient, twisted trees on the rocky hillsides, while another figure gathers them up below. It's basically a snapshot of daily survival beautifully preserved in clay. You know, farming in ancient Greece was never an easy gig. The soil was notoriously poor and rocky, and the rainfall was wildly unpredictable. Honestly, one bad dry season could completely destroy months of exhausting effort. Yet, generation after generation patiently worked the soil because it provided their essential triad of survival. Cereals like barley and wheat, grapes for their wine, and those vital, life-sustaining olive trees. The crucial takeaway here is that the ancient Greek diet was heavily dictated by the land's limitations. Meat, like beef or pork, was a massive, expensive luxury. It was rarely consumed outside of major religious sacrifices or big festivals. So instead, they fueled their bodies heavily with cereals, vegetables, legumes, and the abundant seafood provided by the surrounding waters. Down by the sparkling water, while Nikos works the hills, old fishermen are preparing their simple wooden boats. Because Greece has a Mediterranean climate where most freshwater rivers completely dry up during the summer, they literally had to turn to the Aegean Sea for survival. And unlike in Egypt, where fishing could be a fun, noble leisure activity, fishing in ancient Greece was a strict commercial necessity. It was usually practiced by the lower castes or slaves. Sure, the wealthy might buy fresh fish, but for everyone else, this daily catch was heavily salted just to make it last.
Section 3. Craftsmen of the village, the family trades.
So, as the morning moves toward midday, the rest of the village is hard at work. Jobs for men in ancient Greece were super diverse. They ranged from soldiers and government workers to highly specialized artisans, crafting goods that the entire Mediterranean world would come to envy. In prominent cities like Athens and Corinth, potters worked as highly skilled professional craftsmen, and this was almost entirely a family affair. Children would grow up totally immersed in the craft, starting at an early age by performing vital tasks like turning the heavy potter's wheel for their parents. And the process of making these iconic faces? It was incredibly meticulous. Most everyday pots were thrown on a wheel and built up carefully in sections. Some were even pressed into these totally unique molds shaped like animal or human heads. But for the massive storage jars, well, the craftsmen couldn't use a wheel at all. They had to construct them by painstakingly coiling thick ropes of clay, stacking them up, and then smoothing out the surface by hand before finally firing them in a kiln. I want you to notice the really unique pointed end on this storage jar here. That wasn't a mistake or some weird style choice. It was highly deliberate. These jars were so absolutely enormous and heavy when they were filled up with grain or oil that the pointed end meant they actually had to be leaned directly against the sturdy walls of the home's storerooms just to stay standing up. Section 4. The evening gathering, returning to the courtyard. Eventually, the intense afternoon heat sets in, and the day's hard physical labor wraps up. The farmers descend from the rocky hills, the fishermen pull their boats onto the sand, and the family reunites back in the courtyard. Now, this gathering is a great reminder of the era's strict social structures. By the age of 7, boys were sent off to school to learn reading, math, writing, and the absolutely crucial skill of debate for their future participation in the democracy. Girls, on the other hand, remained in the home, learning to weave and manage the household from their mothers. In childhood back then, it was incredibly brief. By merely 13 years old, you were pretty much considered a full-grown adult. As they rest out in the courtyard, the bright white stones of the village practically glow in the setting sun. Now, this wasn't just some aesthetic choice for a nice view. On the Cycladic Islands, where wood was incredibly scarce, homes were built straight from the dark, rocky terrain. But dark stones absorb the brutal summer sun, literally turning the homes into ovens. So the residents developed this incredibly practical architectural trick. They painted the stones bright white to reflect the harsh sunlight, which naturally cooled down their indoor spaces. Finally, as the sky darkens, the family sits together for esperisma, their evening meal. They share some watered-down wine and a dish called mazaka. It's a simple but really filling dough made of coarsely ground barley mixed with water, milk, and olive oil. Accompanied by garlic, greens, and maybe a little salted fish, They just enjoy the quiet, profound beauty of a simple meal earned through honest, back-breaking work. Looking back at the timeline of this day, we can really see the true heartbeat of ancient Greece. From the pre-dawn silence of the Akratisma and that long walk to the fields, through the bustling midday labor, and concluding with the peaceful Esperisma, this gentle, unhurried rhythm really shaped the absolute backbone of one of history's greatest civilizations. As the stars finally return over the Aegean Sea, this explainer comes to a close, but it leaves us with a pretty provocative thought. In our modern rush of constant alarms, glowing screens, and instant gratification, what simple daily beauties are we completely forgetting to notice? Perhaps there's still something incredibly valuable we can learn from a world governed by the sunrise, the soil, and the timeless rhythms of nature. Think about it. Until next time, keep exploring.
Welcome to this explainer. Tonight, we're going to do something a little different. I want you to imagine waking up tomorrow morning without that awful alarm clock blaring. No phones buzzing, no electricity, none of the usual morning rush. Just dim the lights, take a nice deep breath, and let's travel back together to a peaceful morning on the edge of the Aegean Sea. We're going to spend the day with an ancient Greek farmer named Nikos. The world is really just waking up. The stars are only just starting to fade out. Picture a cool, gentle breeze moving quietly across the hills. And, somewhere in the distance, a lonely rooster breaks the silence. Our farmer, Nikos, opens his eyes. There are no loud alarms here, right? His body has just naturally learned the rhythm of the sun. That early dawn light is incredibly soothing, kind of shifting the sky from a deep purple to this soft golden orange. The whole village awakens at this really calm, comfortable pace, totally unhurried by the demands of a modern clock. Let's step quietly into Nikos' family home. The architecture here is so deeply tied to nature. The walls are made of simple, sun-dried bricks, but they have these small windows set very high up, and this clever design was totally intentional. It allowed the cool, fresh morning air to flow in while keeping the house nice and comfortable during those scorching summer days. The real heart of the home, though, is the central courtyard. It's open to the sky, super peaceful, and it literally forms the center of their daily activity. Arranged thoughtfully around that sunlit courtyard are the family's rooms. Right out there in the open air, you'd find a simple well for drawing cool water and a small family altar. That's where they'd honor the household gods, really just asking for rain and a safe day. Interestingly enough, their homes featured specialized spaces. So, the andron was a room specifically meant for men to gather and entertain guests, while the gonaikon was a separate, dedicated space for the women of the house to work and socialize. It was just a very structured, organized way of living that flowed beautifully around that central open space. Now, think about how resourceful these families had to be. These enormous, simple clay storage jars were absolutely crucial for survival. They were meticulously constructed, mostly by coiling the clay and then just smoothing it all out by hand. Notice that pointed end at the bottom? Because of that unique shape, they had to be leaned carefully against the stone walls just to stand up. Inside these quiet, sturdy jars rested the really precious stuff: olive oil, water, and grain that sustained their daily life. Nothing was wasted. Every single thing was valued. Inside, Nikos' wife has quietly prepared breakfast. The family gathers around a sturdy wooden table for a meal they call akratisma. Nobody's rushing out the door with a travel mug of coffee here. Instead, this is a quiet, shared time for conversation before heading out for a gentle day of work in the fields. It's just a really grounded, peaceful way to start the morning, drawing energy from the food and, honestly, from each other. So what's actually on the table? Well, it's a diet that's beautifully connected to the earth. You've got fresh, coarse barley bread. Beside it, small bowls of olives, a slice of creamy goat cheese, maybe some sweet figs they just picked yesterday, and a little honey glowing in a clay dish. They pour warm goat's milk into simple clay cups. And for a bit of extra stamina for the physical work ahead, they'd actually dip their hearty barley bread into a bit of watered-down wine. It was a simple, earthy meal, but incredibly rich in the nutrients they needed to form that rocky landscape. Another absolute staple of their diet was something called maza. Preparing it was this incredibly calming, patient, and rhythmic process. First, they'd slowly grind the barley into flour. Then, they'd mix it with whatever simple ingredients they had on hand, usually water, milk, and a little olive oil, kneading it into a dough. Finally, they'd just leave it to dry naturally under the warm Mediterranean sun. This whole routine really reminds us of how beautifully their daily survival was intertwined with the slow, patient rhythm of nature. While the family eats, Nico's grandmother is softly telling stories to the kids about the village from many years ago. It's this lovely time of passing down wisdom. Much like their written language, the Greek alphabet, which carried their philosophies and laws, their history and everyday moments were painted directly onto decorated pottery. The stories being told around that breakfast table were basically the living, breathing version of the scenes we still find painted on their clay pots today. All right, breakfast is finished and the family gets ready to head outside. They secure their clothing, which is a simple garment known as a kithen. It was a beautifully basic tunic made from a single rectangle of wool or, if they were a bit wealthier, soft linen. They just fasten it and secure it with a belt at the waist. It's a humble, super comfortable garment that breathes easily. It was perfectly designed to let them move freely in that warm, salty breeze coming off the sea. As Nikos steps out of the courtyard, we transition into the wider world, and the sensory journey of this morning is just wonderful. The fresh sea breeze carries the distant, rhythmic sound of waves gently meeting the shore. The air smells wonderfully of wild herbs and morning dew. Down the path, you'd see a few small fishing boats slowly disappearing toward the open blue sea. Shepherds are whistling softly, gently guiding their sheep into the lush green hills. While donkeys patiently carry sacks of grain toward the nearby mill, the peaceful rhythm of another ordinary day is officially underway. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how accurately these archaeological artifacts actually mirror the life of our farmer. Nikos joins his father to work beneath trees that are already hundreds of years old. And exactly what they're doing, gently knocking olives from the branches and gathering them below, is perfectly preserved right here on this ancient vase. It isn't just art, it's practically a photograph of a quiet, rhythmic morning from 2.5 millennia ago. Out in the grove, everything is just totally tranquil. The thick trunks of the ancient olive trees twist gracefully toward that bright blue sky. Nikos and his father work carefully. They aren't rushing, just steadily collecting the dark green fruit by hand. As their woven baskets slowly fill up, there's no loud machinery, no traffic, literally just the sound of birds singing softly in the branches above, the quiet buzzing of bees moving from flower to flower, and the warm breeze rustling the leaves. It is pure peace. This quiet routine perfectly sums up everything we've explored in today's explainer. For ordinary people in ancient Greece, life is built upon patience, family, and respect for nature. Every sunrise brought new work, and every sunset brought well-earned rest. Their days were deeply connected to the earth, grounded in simple food, simple work, and simple happiness. It really leaves us with a provocative thought, doesn't it? As we wake up to our own blaring alarm clocks and frantic schedules tomorrow, how might we bring just a little of this ancient, quiet simplicity into our own mind? Welcome to our latest explainer. Today, we're going to leave the loud, fast-paced modern world completely behind us. We're stepping back in time to explore the tranquil, unhurried daily rhythms of an ancient Greek village. It's time to just slow down. I want you to step back over 2,000 years with me. Close your eyes for just a second. The morning sun now shines brightly over a peaceful Greek village. Its golden light reflects across the calm waters of the Aegean Sea. Can you feel that gentle breeze? It carries the scent of fresh bread, rich olive oil, and wild lavender growing on the nearby hills. It's just beautifully still. And our day actually begins inside a traditional Greek home. These were built around an open, airy courtyard. This was literally the secure center of family activity, usually featuring a water well and a small altar. What's amazing is how the very architecture was designed for total harmony with nature. They used simple earth and sun-dried bricks for the walls, with these small windows set high up. It's kind of a genius design, honestly. It kept the house wonderfully cool during those scorching summer days, but cozy and warm through the winter. So waking up in this beautifully grounded space, the villagers started their day with an unhurried meal called akrotisma. Nobody is rushing out the door with a travel mug here. Instead, they sat down to eat hearty barley bread, or wheat bread, if they were a bit wealthier, and they dipped it directly into wine. This gave them a slow, steady energy for the day's work. Sometimes they'd add a splash of goat's milk, a handful of local olives, and some sweet dried figs. Simple, but perfect. And their clothing perfectly matched this whole unhurried lifestyle. Both men and women wore a basic garment called a chiton. It's basically an elegant tunic made from a single, simple rectangle of thin wool or linen cloth, just cut into two. They delicately fasten it with pins at the shoulders and tie it securely at the waist. It was functional, modest, and just incredibly comfortable.
Okay, so dressed for the day, families would step out of their courtyards. Today happens to be market day. Picture a young boy, let's call him Nikos, walking beside his father along a narrow stone path. Their donkey patiently carries 2 heavy baskets of freshly harvested olives. They are heading into the local marketplace beside the small harbor. As they arrive, the square slowly fills with friendly voices. There's no shouting, no rushing, just neighbors greeting one another with these warm, genuine smiles.
Now, this marketplace was where trust and community were built through actual face-to-face conversations. Farmers traded the rich harvests of the Mediterranean here. Imagine Nikos and his father meeting an elderly olive oil merchant. They carefully taste this year's oil together, and its rich flavor tells them the harvest has been a success. After some friendly conversation, they agree upon a fair exchange. Both men smile, both leave satisfied. Business was truly built upon honesty and respect, often trading goods directly instead of just using coins. And it wasn't just farmers, right? You'd also see fishermen returning from the clear blue waters of the Aegean Sea. They navigated those rocky, indented coasts in small wooden boats, using simple hooks, lines, and harpoons. Over in the market, a fisherman proudly displays abundant fresh catches caught right before sunrise, things like sea bream, sardines, and octopus. White seabirds glide quietly overhead as the harbor gently rocks the boats.
Wandering just a bit further through the square, you start to hear the rhythmic spinning of a potter's wheel, echoing softly from the artisan workshops. Children quietly admire the painted clay pots, decorated with beautiful Greek patterns. These crafts were passed down through generations. Families worked together, with children growing up right there in the workshop, learning the trade by slowly turning the wheel for their fathers.
And the thing is, these craftsmen never rushed. A potter's experienced hands move gently, without hurry, and absolutely without waste. Shaping fresh clay on the spinning wheel, they would build the pot up slowly, in careful sections. Every single bowl, every vase, every cup was deliberately crafted to last for many, many years. But here's what's truly fascinating. They didn't just make functional vessels. They created lasting records of their lives. These beautiful pots were meticulously decorated with scenes of ordinary life. It was essentially freezing these quiet, everyday moments in clay forever. Thanks to their unhurried dedication, we can still sit back and admire these serene glimpses of ancient life, preserved flawlessly for us over 2 millennia later. Of course, these vessels were far more than just decorative art. They were the essential, lasting containers for the village's most prized goods. The larger pots were used to store and gently transport all that precious golden olive oil we talked about. Other vessels were brought out to serve watered-down wine at evening gatherings, while these slender, delicate flasks were meant specifically for holding sweet, perfumed oils used in intimate rituals. As midday slowly approaches, maybe a musician begins quietly playing a small wooden flute. The peaceful melody drifts across the marketplace. People pause. Some just close their eyes and enjoy the gentle music. It makes you think about their diet, which was remarkably grounded and built around wonderfully fresh ingredients. Barley bread, dried figs, fresh vegetables, local cheese, and fresh fish. Red meat was a really rare treat. It's exactly this balanced, simple diet that we now celebrate globally as the incredibly healthy Mediterranean diet. While as the bright blue sky slowly fades and evening settles over those sun-dried brick homes, the household divides into dedicated spaces. The men would often gather in a special room called the Andron for dinner parties that could run into the late hours, filled with quiet conversation. Meanwhile, the women retired to the gynekon. This was a separate, quiet room set aside specifically for them to relax and manage the household away from visiting guests. The day's gentle labor is finally completed. The marketplace falls completely still, and the fishing boats rock softly in the harbor under the moonlight. It's a moment of profound tranquility. And it's a moment beautifully captured in the graceful lines of ancient artwork, just like the women tending to their evening routines on this surviving ancient vase. Which gently brings us to the end of our explainer today. When you really think about it, looking at these clay vessels and hearing about these unhurried days, how does it feel to know you share the very same simple daily routines as people from 2,000 years ago? As you close your eyes today, whether you're about to drift off to sleep or just taking a moment to reflect, Consider how these ancient rhythms of eating, dressing, and community continue to peacefully echo in our...
Welcome to this relaxing explainer. Today, we're looking at Chapter 4, Inside an Ancient Greek Family Home. Let's just slow down for a bit, take a nice, deep, grounding breath, and step completely away from the hustle of the modern world.
The busy marketplace quiets down. Let's step through the wooden gate of an ancient Greek home. You know, picture the warm afternoon sun just slowly filling a peaceful village with this beautiful golden light. As the day's heat really peaks, the noisy marketplace gradually gets quieter. Most families have headed home to seek some refuge. So imagine for a second that you're slowly walking up to one of these glowing white stone homes. You reach out, push open a heavy wooden gate, and instantly all those street noises just fade away. You've stepped right into a peaceful domestic sanctuary.
And right at the very heart of this ancient home is the courtyard. Picture this, wide open space, sitting quietly under a bright blue Mediterranean sky. It's surrounded by these simple, really thick stone walls and warm clay roof tiles. And there are no grand decorations here, just practical objects made with a lot of care. Maybe there's a small olive tree growing peacefully in the corner. It just feels incredibly calm, safe, peaceful. Actually, a huge amount of ancient Greek family life centered right here around this open, breathable space. What made these simple stone walls so perfectly comfortable? I mean, summer in Greece means hot, dry days. We're talking temperatures often soaring well above 34 degrees Celsius. Yet, as you stand in this courtyard, you feel this really comfortable, soothing coolness. So the big question is, how did these ancient families manage to stay so perfectly comfortable without any modern machinery? Well, the answer really lies in their profound connection to their environment. They relied heavily on natural cooling and passive design. It's a brilliant, highly sustainable way of just working with the climate instead of fighting it. Those thick stone walls and smooth stone floors basically acted as a thermal mass. They patiently absorbed all that intense heat during the day, which kept the rooms cool, and then they'd slowly release that warmth at night when the temperatures finally dropped. Plus, they were incredibly smart about natural cross-ventilation. By perfectly placing their windows and doors, they allowed cool sea breezes to flow gently right through the home, naturally flushing out any of that warm, stagnant air.
This brings us to a quote from the ancient writer Xenophon. He said, "If a house faces south, the sun will shine into the pastas in winter, and so we shall have shade." This perfectly captures their deep understanding of the sun's natural rhythm. He noticed that if a house is built facing south, that low winter sun shines deep into the pastas, which is the open inner porch, bringing in all this vital warmth. But then in the summer, when the sun is beating down from directly overhead, the roof naturally provides deep, cooling shade. It's literally a home built in total harmony with the seasons. Now, let's move into our next section, the rhythm of the loom. We'll step away from the bright courtyard and head inside to the shaded, cooler rooms of the house to explore the quiet art of ancient weaving.
As your eyes sort of adjust to the softer light inside, you start to hear this rhythmic, almost hypnotic sound. Thump, thump. This is where the women of the house are quietly working at a large vertical loom. It's an incredibly slow, patient process where every single thread really matters. To keep everything tight, they use these heavy, handcrafted clay discs hanging at the bottom. These are clay loom weights, and they were used for tensioning the warp threads. Each one weighs about 180 grams. They were usually made from local blended clay and just fired in simple pits. Their whole job is to patiently pull those vertical warp threads taut, holding perfect tension as the weaver works. So it's a pretty heavy physical task, but also deeply meditative.
So what does crafting a chlamys cloak actually look like? Well, it involves a mesmerizing, really repetitive cycle. First, the weaver spools the horizontal weft threads using a wooden shuttle, which they called a pinion. Then, they carefully separate the threads using a wool comb, or cateus. Finally, they compress the weave with a wooden beater, known as a spath. She gently but firmly beats that weave right into place, and thread by thread, this beautiful textile just slowly begins to take shape in the quiet of the afternoon. Now, this methodical labor was far more than just a simple household chore. It was actually highly valuable. To put it in perspective, a team of 3 women could weave roughly 13 to 17 of these cloaks in a single year. After keeping whatever the family needed, they could sell the excess. And those extra textiles, they could bring in anywhere from 60 to 140 drachmae a year. So this quiet, rhythmic work happening in the shadows of the home made a truly profound contribution to the household's wealth and survival.
Moving on to our next section, fragrant herbs, simple foods. As that golden afternoon slowly shifts toward evening, the long shadows begin to stretch across the stone floor. Let's step back out into the sun-warmed courtyard, where the scent of raw wool gives way to fragrant ingredients. We're looking at the Mediterranean triad: cereals, olives, and grapes. The ancient Greek diet was really defined by its absolute simplicity and frugality. It relied so heavily on these earthy staples. This provided a deeply nourishing foundation, built entirely on resources that required a lot of patience and care to cultivate from that rocky Greek soil. Meat was actually pretty rare. Instead, they found their sustenance in what the earth readily provided. Just imagine the sensory experience of this courtyard kitchen. Over a small, carefully controlled fire, you've got clay pots bubbling away with protein-rich legumes, things like lentils, chickpeas, and lupin beans. A really common dish was broad beans that were boiled and mashed into a thick, warm, comforting soup called etnos. And to flavor this simple food, they just used fragrant herbs growing right there along the stone walls: fresh rosemary, mint, and thyme. Even the poorest families found ways to sustain themselves, sometimes by gathering and eating oak acorns. Absolutely nothing was wasted. All these quiet sounds, the gentle routines, the earthy scents, they all fill what the Greeks called the Oikos. The Oikos is the fundamental unit of ancient Greek society. It encompasses the physical house, the family line, and all its inhabitants. It's such a beautiful, holistic concept, you know? It isn't just about the physical stone and clay of the house itself. It's the living, breathing family unit. It's the generations that came before, the ones coming after, and everyone working together under that one roof. It really is the absolute heart of everyday life. Within the Oikos, spaces were often divided up by roles. You had the gyneconetus, which were the women's quarters. This was traditionally situated in the back or upstairs, and it focused on the vital work of textiles and household care. Then you had the andron, the men's quarters, which were used for festive dining and hosting guests from the outside world. But even with these divided spaces, it's so important to remember that the peaceful courtyard we've been resting in was always the shared heart. It was the central place where all members of the household reconnected under the open sky. As the ancient day gently fades, how does this quiet simplicity compare to your own evening rest? The Mediterranean breeze just continues drifting through the olive trees. The birds are beginning to return to their nests. The rhythmic work of the loom finally stops, and a simple evening meal is shared. It's a life made up of tranquil, self-sustaining rhythms. So as this ancient day gently fades into night, how does this quiet, deeply connected simplicity compare to the way you find rest today? I'll let that peaceful thought settle as our relaxing journey through the ancient world comes to a... Welcome to this explainer. You know, today we're doing things a little differently. We're stepping away from the rush of the modern world, putting aside our usual energetic deep dives to explore a really fascinating piece of quiet history. We're going to look at why the ancient Greeks lived so differently, and specifically the surprising, beautifully simple details of what they actually ate every day. Let's just take a breath and dive in. Tonight, you leave the modern world behind and travel back more than 2,000 years to experience the peaceful rhythm of everyday life. Think of this idea as a gentle signal for us to just let go of modern stress. You know, silencing those endless notifications and stepping into the truly calm reality of the ancient world. Our goal today is to explore the sensory world of ancient domestic life. Just imagine it. A bright afternoon sun is slowly fading behind the western hills. You're walking through a quiet stone village, discovering the simple beauty of ordinary life, really just taking it one step at a time.
As that golden light grows softer, we encounter a really beautiful concept, deepnon. Now, rather than viewing this as just some textbook term for dinner, I want you to think of it as a gentle evening ritual. This was the absolute most important and peaceful meal of the ancient Greek day, taken just as nightfall began to wrap the village in twilight. It's that moment when families returned from the olive groves and the sea, gathering together as the bright afternoon slowly faded away.
And here is the very foundation of their evening. Inside a small stone home, the evening meal is slowly being prepared. Imagine the rich, earthy aroma as golden olive oil is poured into a large clay pot. Fresh onions are gently sizzling over the fire. Fresh olives are brought to the table in these little clay bowls. It's just simple, unhurried, and perfectly balanced. This preparation actually builds into their broader world through what historians call the Mediterranean triad: cereals, olives, and grapes. But, this wasn't just a diet to the Greeks. It was a completely harmonious relationship with the land itself. It guided their peaceful way of life, reflecting this deep, deep respect for agricultural cycles and the changing seasons that literally provided everything for them.
And right at the center of almost every single meal was bread. Imagine the incredibly comforting smell of fresh barley or wheat bread drifting from clay ovens, wafting right through the narrow, stone-paved streets of the village. Picture the baker carefully removing warm loaves as the crisp air cools. It was a daily comfort, always broken by hand and shared among the family. Accompanying that bread was whatever the season generously provided. Gathered from the earth, we see things like lentils and beans, fresh cucumbers and cabbage, sweet figs and grapes, fragrant wild herbs picked just that afternoon. The summer months provided this beautiful, fresh bounty of vegetables, while in the quieter winter months, they relied on dried fruits, apples, and the absolutely essential, deeply nourishing legumes they had so carefully stored away.
As the family washes these vegetables in cool spring water, a really gentle sea breeze cools the warm air. Down at the small harbor, fishing boats are returning, one by one, from the Aegean Sea. The water is totally smooth, reflecting the colorful evening sky, and sailors quietly carry small baskets filled with the day's catch toward the village.
Because the vast majority of Greeks lived near the coast, the sea was incredibly generous to them, providing the bulk of their protein. Fish, squid, and shellfish, these were everyday staples. A father might clean several fresh fish, purchased from a local fisherman, roasting them over hot coals until their delicious aroma completely filled the courtyard.
It's actually wonderful to contrast the everyday joy of roasted fish with the extreme rarity of meat in the ancient Greek diet. Fish was this abundant, everyday sustenance. Meat, on the other hand, it was a rare luxury. They maintained such a beautiful balance of resources, happily taking what the sea offered freely, but treating their land animals with a much deeper, more cautious reverence.
Crucially, killing a domesticated animal, like a goat or a sheep, was felt to be a really significant, heavy act. It just wasn't done casually. Meat was usually consumed only after a portion of it was respectfully sacrificed to the gods. It was a huge event, a true rarity, which really made the everyday simplicity of their vegetable and fish diet all the more peaceful and routine. Back in the courtyard, the meal is finally coming together. Warm lentil soup, a bit of garlic, wild herbs, and a pinch of sea salt are slowly simmering over the fire. The rich, comforting aromas wrap around the family. They're basically turning simple, fresh ingredients into a beautiful feast where absolutely nothing is wasted and every single ingredient is deeply valued. Ultimately, what we see here is a wonderfully humble, balanced, and healthy approach to daily nourishment. It was completely characterized by a beautiful frugality. They relied heavily on agriculture, legumes, and the earth's natural rhythm. It was a diet born of necessity, for sure, but it cultivated a life deeply, deeply in tune with the natural world. As they sit down to eat, we see a pretty interesting social dynamic. Historical texts, including writings from Aristotle, actually note that while wealthier men and women often dined in completely separate rooms, a humble, ordinary household was totally different. Having no slaves, the poor relied on their wives and children to help serve, creating this really intimate, shared gathering right in the center of their courtyard as the sun dipped below the horizon. And as the meal gently winds down, we reach the evening's sweetness. There is creamy goat cheese, sweet dates and almonds. Children might enjoy fresh figs dipped in just a little bit of honey, which, by the way, was considered a very special treat back then. And to softly close the meal, small clay cups of cool, refreshing spring water are passed around, soothing everyone before the quiet evening fully begins. A good meal is never about luxury. It is about gratitude. This is the core lesson we can take from their ancient evening ritual: the deep joy of fresh food, a loving family, quiet laughter, and another peaceful day shared together around a low wooden table. Nobody is looking at a clock. The simple passing of the sun is enough to guide their day. Outside the courtyard, the golden sunlight slowly, gently, fades across the ancient olive trees. The shadows grow long and soft. The family finishes their deep dawn, their quiet conversations naturally settling down just as the colors of the sky shift from a warm amber to a deep, calming lavender. The Aegean Sea becomes calm once more,
looking like a sheet of smooth, dark glass reflecting the very first evening stars. Seabirds quietly return to their nests along the rocky shoreline. Everything is taking a slow, deep breath. The day's work is done. The mind is finally allowed to rest.
The village prepares for another peaceful evening. Small oil lamps begin to glow warmly from wooden windows before being gently extinguished one by one. The village is wrapped in complete silence, watched over by a Milky Way that stretches across the heavens like a glowing river of light. And so, as the ancient world rests beneath the stars, I want to leave you with a final, gentle thought. In our era of fast food and constant screens, when will you next unplug, slow down, and truly savor a simple, quiet meal like the Greeks did? May the calm beauty of this history inspire your next dinner. Thanks for joining me on this relaxing explainer, and sleep well. Welcome to today's explainer. We're going to do something a little different this time. We're going to leave the rushed, noisy modern world behind for a little while and just step into the quiet, peaceful rhythm of an ancient Greek village. You know, we aren't looking at great battles or towering monuments today. Instead, we're diving into something much more profound, which is the beautifully simple, structured rhythm of an ordinary day. Imagine just traveling back more than 2,000 years to experience something far quieter. Seriously, think about trading in your constant notifications and endless traffic for the gentle song of birds and the distant sound of small waves breaking the morning silence. It's really a complete sensory shift into a world that was governed entirely by the sun and the seasons. Chapter 1. Dawn in the Village. Awakening with the Sun. The awakening village is quite literally a symphony of soft scents and sounds. Picture the fresh, earthy scent of ancient olive trees mingling with a comforting aroma of warm bread being pulled right out of clay ovens. Think of the pots of lavender and rosemary resting peacefully on stone doorsteps, with their gentle fragrance just drifting on the cool morning breeze. There is an absolute, complete absence of a rush here. Everything moves exactly as it should, just one gentle moment at a time. Chapter 2. The Rhythm of Labor. A Life Divided. Now, life in this era was distinctly divided. Men largely inhabited the public sphere. They acted as full citizens, made the large political decisions, took part in public sports, and fought in armies. Women, on the other hand, inhabited the domestic sphere. But make no mistake, they were absolutely the engine of the household. They ran the home, bore the children, and produced the vital textiles that kept the family clothed and financially secure. It's a very stark separation of societal roles, deeply ingrained in our daily rhythm. But, you know, this rhythm wasn't exactly identical everywhere. For example, an Athenian woman's education was deeply focused on the skills needed to run a home, things like cooking and the highly demanding art of weaving. If we wander over to Sparta, however, the rhythm changes a bit. Spartan women were taught reading and writing, and even skills to protect themselves in battle, which granted them a very different kind of freedom compared to their Athenian counterparts. Chapter 3. The Art of Weaving, the Household Engine. Let's really ground ourselves in the physical reality of the past for a second. Imagine holding a weathered bone weaving tool in one hand, standing before a vertical, single-heddle, warp-weighted loom. Try to imagine the sound of this room. You have the friction of the wooden tools, the rhythmic clinking of those discoid clay weights at the bottom pulling the threads taut. Each of those was carefully formed by hand from local clay weighing about 180 grams. It is a incredibly slow, methodical, deeply physical process. First, the weaver spools the weft using a wooden shuttle, which was known as a pinion, just passing it smoothly back and forth. Next, they'd use a wooden or bone beater called a spathe to firmly compress the weave. It makes a very firm, satisfying beat that tightens the threads. And finally, the finished textile had to be washed and beaten multiple times over a railing just to create a cohesive, balanced cloth. So how long did all this take? Well, to put it in perspective, for a basic utilitarian garment like a chlamys, which was a common cloak worn by travelers, recent experimental archaeology tells us it would take a team of 3 weavers roughly 3 to 4 weeks. 3 to 4 weeks of steady, quiet, rhythmic labor, softly passing day by day. And this quiet work wasn't just a household chore. It was a massive contribution to the household economy. By selling surplus textiles, a family could bring in an estimated 60 to 140 drachmae in a single calendar year.
So the household really was a true engine of production, powered almost entirely by the women of the family. Chapter 4: Wisdom Beneath the Trees, Learning and Philosophy. As morning gives way to midday, let's picture a villager, we'll call him Nikos, finishing his work in the olive groves. His hands are tired, but his mind feels peaceful. As he walks back toward the village, he passes a small group of children gathered beneath the broad shade of a large plane tree. You see, there are no echoing classrooms here, no printed books, just an elderly teacher with a calm voice. The lessons are simple: careful listening, patient thinking, and thoughtful conversation. The children are learning to read and write simple Greek letters on smooth wooden tablets covered in wax, carefully drawing each shape with a small bronze stylus. And what's really beautiful is that mistakes can simply be smoothed over and erased. Learning here requires patience, not speed. Nearby, older boys quietly discuss the stories of Homer, talking about courage, kindness, and the importance of living an honest life. Because education in ancient Greece wasn't just about knowledge, it was about character. Parents taught children to respect their elders, care for their neighbors, and really value self-control above wealth. Continuing his walk, Nikos passes several village elders deep in thought under another olive tree. And they aren't shouting or arguing. They are simply exploring life with quiet curiosity. One wonders if happiness comes from riches. Another believes true happiness comes from a simple life. A third quietly smiles and proposes that perhaps both are less important than a peaceful mind. In ancient Greece, wisdom began by admitting that no one knows everything, so their conversations just flow naturally, without anger, driven only by a desire to understand. Now, as we observe this village, we also have to acknowledge the societal structures of the era neutrally. Historically, most girls were married quite young, typically by the age of 14, to husbands who were at least 30. Polygamy was also present among the wealthy, with some men having several wives. These were simply the deeply ingrained, ordinary realities of their time, which shaped the families that populated these quiet homes. Chapter 5: The Golden Afternoon, a Slow Descent. The golden afternoon slowly begins to soften, and the botanical heritage of the Greek countryside is incredibly rich. In the quiet gardens beside the stone homes, the sweet herbaceous scent of lemon balm fills the air. The ancient Greeks called it melissa, which is actually also their word for honeybee. The ancient botanist Dioscorides noted how bees totally delight in this herb, and you can just picture them buzzing lazily in the warm, late afternoon sun as the golden light softens over the village. Everything continues at its familiar rhythm as the sun lowers. The fishing boats slowly return to the harbor, rising and falling on the gentle waves. A shepherd quietly leads his sheep home. Nikos pauses beside the sparkling waters of the Aegean Sea, just watching the gentle waves roll onto the shore. Each wave arrives quietly, then returns to the open water, just like each passing day. Simple, peaceful, and always moving forward. Chapter 6: A Peaceful Night Under Endless Stars. As the village settles into sleep, the only light comes from small, simple oil lamps glowing warmly through wooden windows. There are absolutely no streetlights here, no glaring screens, just that soft, flickering warmth. Slowly, one by one, families finish their evening meals and the lamps fade into the quiet dark. The restorative stillness of the world completely takes over. What is truly breathtaking about this era is the sky. Without modern city lights, the night sky was endless. The Milky Way stretches across the heavens like a pale river of light. It was this magnificent, glittering ceiling shared by everyone who lived there, a deeply comforting reminder of the vastness and peacefulness of the natural world. The ancient Greeks didn't chase time, they moved with it. As the stars wheel overhead and the Aegean Sea whispers against the shore, the village rests completely at peace, knowing tomorrow will bring another peaceful sunrise. We may not be able to literally return to this ancient world, but it makes you wonder, what elements of this quiet, deliberate rhythm could you invite into your own busy life tomorrow? Welcome to this explainer on the rhythm of ancient Greek life, specifically looking at an ordinary evening. Today, we're just going to leave the noise of the modern world behind us. We're going on a quiet, relaxing journey into how ancient people actually found rest and why their evenings looked so incredibly different from ours today. Picture this. The afternoon is slowly giving way to evening. The bright Mediterranean sun begins its gentle descent toward the western sea. A cool breeze kicks up, and it carries the scent of olive trees, wildflowers, and maybe some freshly baked bread. The village is just getting quieter. Today's work, It's nearly finished. You've got fishing boats returning safely to the harbor, and farmers are placing their tools inside small wooden sheds for the night. Even the sheep are slowly making their way back to their stone pens.
Section 1. The evening meal. So, the absolute center of the evening was the dipnon. This was, hands down, the most important meal of the day, and it was eaten right at nightfall after a really long day of labor. It was frugal, sure, but it was a deeply comforting meal. As the shadows lengthened outside, small clay oil lamps were carefully lit inside, casting this warm, flickering glow across terracotta bowls. It was a time to just pause, to sit, and to replenish the body after a long day of physical exertion.
And the ancient Greek household itself was actually organized to provide structure to these evenings. The home was typically divided into distinct spaces. You had the andron, which was the men's space, often used for receiving guests, and then there was the gynoeceum, the women's space, that was usually located further back or even upstairs, completely away from public view. Traditionally, men and women would eat and pass the evening in these separate, tranquil areas, with each kind of just following their own quiet rhythms of domestic life.
Section 2. Bread, oil, and wine.
Now, the foundation of their daily survival was built on the classic Mediterranean triad. We're talking cereals like barley and wheat, olives and the gorgeous golden oil pressed from them, and grapes, which were often enjoyed as an unmixed wine called akritos. But, we absolutely have to highlight the humble legumes here too, things like beans, lentils, and chickpeas. Honestly, Greek agriculture simply could not have succeeded without them. They were the quiet, sustaining bedrock of the ordinary diet.
Just imagine the simple sensory experience of eating this meal. Forks, they were entirely unknown back then and honestly, unmissed. Instead, hands were washed clean with a pour of water from a ewer, and meals were just eaten with the fingers. They had these flat, circular loaves of barley bread that were often scored into 4 parts, making them super easy to break by hand. Sometimes they even used that bread as edible plates to hold a modest portion of olives or cheese. It was just a very grounded, tactile way to eat.
Section 3. Gathering in the square. Not every celebration was this huge, grand affair. For ordinary people, these smaller gatherings brought a lot of warmth after a hard day's work. As villagers like, say, a young boy named Nikos help decorate the square with fresh olive branches and clay oil lamps, neighbors start to arrive, and they exchange baskets filled with bread, cheese, fresh grapes, and sweet figs. Basically, no one arrives empty-handed. It's just a moment of profound warmth and quiet happiness shared among family, friends, and neighbors. Section 4. Lyres and gentle melodies. So, here are the primary instruments that literally provided the soundtrack to the ancient world. From top to bottom, we have the kithara, the aulos, and the lyre. Just looking at their elegant shapes really helps us imagine the slow, calming melodies that would have echoed through the olive trees on nights like this.
Let's focus on the lyre for a second. This was a handheld, strummed string instrument, and it was remarkably often built right upon an actual tortoise fell frame. Pretty wild, right? It was very much a folk instrument, primarily used to accompany gentle recitation and soft songs. When a young musician began strumming the lyre in the village square, its delicate notes just brought an immediate soothing warmth to these ordinary gatherings. And soon after, another villager might join in with the aulos. Now this was a really fascinating instrument. It was a pair of pipes with vibrating reeds held straight out in front of the player. The aulos provided this steady, beautiful breath of melody that blended absolutely perfectly with the gentle strumming of the stringed instruments.
Music in ancient Greece was practically woven into the very fabric of life. An aulos player might provide musical accompaniment as the whole village relaxes, but it also guided the rowers out on the seas. It accompanied religious sacrifices to the gods, and, most importantly for our story tonight, it provided the peaceful, rhythmic heartbeat to these deeply restful evening moments under the stars. Section 5. The rhythm of the dance. To the ancient Greeks, dancing was seen as a completely natural response of both the body and the soul to music. They had specific formats for it, too. There were circular dances, moving gracefully around an altar or a focal point. They had linear chain dances where everyone held hands, sometimes called the geronos. And they even had intricate zigzag patterns that imitated myths, like the story of Theseus in the labyrinth. It was always a synchronized, highly unified movement. And to help the dancers keep time, they obviously relied heavily on rhythm. The tympanon, which is a type of frame drum, provided a deep, booming beat. Meanwhile, kratala, which were wooden clappers held in the hands, softly cut through the evening air, helping everyone step in perfect unison. All of this created a really timeless, intergenerational harmony. The oldest members of the village would just smile and clap gently to the rhythm. You can imagine someone like Nico sitting beside his grandmother beneath an old olive tree, listening to stories of festivals from her youth, as the other children eventually joined the wide circle of dancers. It fostered a feeling of profound safety, community, and ultimately rest.
Section 6, A Quiet Night's Rest. I want to share this poetic thought drawn from ancient Greek depictions of life and aging, because it beautifully reflects on the quiet, fleeting nature of time. Quote, "The clock ticks the time, licks weighing moments, a man's going." End quote. It really reminds us to appreciate the quiet, fleeting beauty of these perfectly ordinary ancient days. Back inside the homes, those small clay lamps continue glowing quietly for just a little while longer before they're finally extinguished. And there's a real deep comfort in knowing what comes next. Tomorrow, before sunrise, the fishermen will once again sail out, the farmers will return to their fields, and the bakers will light their ovens. Because their lives were tied completely to the sun and the earth, that beautiful, reliable cycle of life is just going to continue. Simple, peaceful. Which brings us to our final thought in this explainer. As the quiet village settles entirely beneath the star-filled Greek sky, I want to leave you with this question. What simple, ancient joys might we invite into our own busy evenings? Maybe it's breaking bread with our hands, listening to a gentle melody, or honestly, just sitting quietly as the sun goes down. Thank you for taking this relaxing journey into the past with me. May your own evening be just as peaceful, and may you find a very deep, quiet night's rest.
Welcome to this explainer. Close your eyes for just a second and picture this. The warm, golden sun is slowly sinking toward the horizon, and its very last rays are shimmering across the incredibly calm waters of the Aegean Sea. Tonight, we're taking a really tranquil journey back in time. We're going to explore exactly what ordinary life looked like for an ancient Greek household as they finally wound down for the night.
There's a beautifully simple quote from our sources that says, "The day leaned toward its close." And that perfectly captures the soothing rhythm of this evening transition. Imagine stepping inside a modest Athenian house back in the 5th century BCE. The heavy baskets from the olive harvest are all stored away, the public fountains are finally quieting down, and the whole rhythm of the household is shifting. You can feel them moving away from the blistering heat of the day, right towards some deep, absolutely necessary rest.
So, how exactly did an ordinary family in an ancient Greek polis pass these final quiet hours? From the faint, flickering glow of oil lamps to the really simple, grounding food on their tables, we're going to explore the beautiful, quiet details of an ancient evening together. Let's step inside those courtyard walls. Now, these urban homes were built pretty simply out of mud brick and wood, but right at the very center was the open-air heart of daily life. Because they didn't have chimneys, any cooking smoke just drifted naturally up and away through this open space. And it was right here that the family gathered, finally feeling the cool evening breeze roll in off the warm stone. But before they could truly settle in for the night, families wanted peace of mind. They sought spiritual protection. If you looked quietly in the doorways, you'd almost always find a small statuette of Hecate, the goddess of magic. She usually featured 3 figures with their backs to a central pillar, and she stood guard there, deflecting any evil energies, like the dreaded curse of the evil eye. It was all about ensuring a safe, peaceful night's sleep for the whole family. And resting silently in the deep shadows of that courtyard were the pithoi. These were massive clay storage jars. Honestly, they were often taller than a full-grown human being. They were incredibly heavy and thick-walled, and they held the family's hard-earned harvest. We're talking bulk grain and wine kept perfectly cool and fresh through those long Mediterranean nights. As twilight fully arrives, we get to the deep nun. This was the true evening meal, eaten right at nightfall, and it officially signaled the end of the day's labor. But here's where it gets a bit different from what we might expect today. The ancient Greek house operated on some pretty strict divisions, meaning custom usually dictated that men and women dined in entirely separate spaces. The men would gather in the andron, which was essentially the men's lounge, while the women ate separately. So there really wasn't that single shared family dinner table like we're used to. So what exactly was served in the quiet of the evening? Well, the absolute foundation of their diet was was what we call the Mediterranean triad. That's cereals like barley and wheat, rich olive oil, and of course, grapes for wine. These three elements literally shaped every single meal. And quietly supplementing them were essential, humble legumes like lentils and chickpeas. It was a pretty frugal diet, pulled from hard soil, but it was incredibly grounding. Try to imagine the sensory, rhythmic experience of this meal. Cutlery? The fork? Completely unknown. Instead, your fingers did all the work. You begin by breaking off a piece of scored flatbread. You might dip that warm bread into a shallow cup of Akratos, which was a strong, unmixed wine. Then you just scoop up some soft lentils, or maybe a dark salted olive. It was a really simple, quiet way to nourish the body after a long day. Now, to truly understand this peaceful evening, we do have to look at the whole picture. The labor of running this house absolutely did not rest on the family alone. While the Eleutheros, the free person, was resting in the courtyard at day's end, the Oikos, the enslaved household worker, was still wrapping up their domestic labor. They were the ones fetching those heavy jars of water, serving the meal, and carrying all the terracotta bowls away. It's a sobering but essential fact that this quiet evening was entirely made possible by their largely unseen constant work. And you know, that system extended far beyond the courtyard walls, too. The bread and the oil sitting on that table were intimately connected to distant, really arduous labor. The grain, the olive, the vine, they all grew from soil worked by unfree hands. Even further away, stone quarries and silver mines swallowed workers into incredibly grueling conditions. All of that reality stands silently just beneath the comfort of the evening home. Returning to the quiet of the house itself, the older members of the family are just finishing their meal. In this ancient cycle of life, the elderly were viewed as the ultimate guarantors of the family's stability. Grandparents provided this incredible anchor of tradition. Remember, this is a world without formal schools for most, so a grandmother might quietly tell a myth or a story from long ago, while a grandfather might patiently sit there and show a child exactly how to tie a fishing net. We actually see this deep reverence reflected in their art. If you look at red figure vases from the 5th century, painters used these incredibly fine brushstrokes to depict elders with thinning, white hair, and stooped frames, often leaning softly on walking sticks. Within the home, these visual markers of age represented a highly respected shift. They were moving from being youthful laborers to becoming the quiet, respected keepers of the family's memory. Now, contrast our family's quiet, relaxing meal with the world just down the street. If you listen closely, you might hear the distant sounds of a symposium. This is where wealthy citizens hired professional entertainers. You'd hear the alatrides playing the pipes, the rhythmic clapping of the crotola, the heavy thud of acrobatic solo dancers, all culminating in this frenzied kamos dance right out in the streets. But for our ordinary household, those sounds just remain a faint echo far away in the night. Back in our modest home, the stories are finally winding down. To light up the growing darkness, the Greeks used simple terracotta oil lamps. They just pour olive oil into a small clay reservoir, and a single wick would float in the oil, casting this incredibly warm, soft, golden light right across the mud brick walls. It was a gentle, beautiful signal. The day is finally done. One by one, those final lamps are slowly extinguished. The terracotta bowls have all been cleared away. The village grows completely, wonderfully quiet, bathed in the silver light of the moon rising over those distant mountains. Down in the harbor, the fishing boats are gently rocking. Only the sound of crickets and that endless, gentle rhythm of the Aegean tide remain. The household has found its rest. And tomorrow, the ancient cycle of the sun and the soil will just begin all over again. We've explored the mud brick walls, the simple flatbread, the unseen labor, and the soft glow of oil lamps. It's fascinating because the desire for a safe home, a shared meal, and a moment of quiet rest remains beautifully unchanged across thousands of years. As you wind down your own evening, I want to leave you with this. What ancient rhythms of rest do you share tonight? Thank you so much for joining me on This Explainer. Sleep well and keep learning. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're taking a slightly different approach. We're going on a relaxing journey into the ancient past. Picture this. The final glow of sunset is slowly disappearing beyond the distant mountains, and the Aegean Sea has become perfectly calm. Gentle waves are quietly touching the rocky shore, and the cool night breeze carries the scent of olive trees, wild herbs, and the salty sea. We're stepping back in time, away from the noise and rush of our modern lives, to explore the quiet, unhurried history of the ancient Greek world. So let's dive right into this beautifully simple question. How did an ordinary household in a Greek polis or city-state pass a single night? I want you to just let go of your busy day for a moment. Forget the notifications, the traffic, those endless to-do lists. We're gently stepping into the unhurried rhythm of an ancient home, to observe the quiet moments that happened after the day's work was completely done. Just imagine the fading light over these simple mud and wood houses. There are no loud machines here, no busy roads. Down by the water, a fisherman secures his small wooden boat against the gentle tide. Somewhere nearby, a baker prepares flour for tomorrow's bread before quietly blowing out his final lamp. The village slowly falls completely silent as wooden doors are gently closed and families turn their attention inward for the night. When we look at black figure pottery from roughly 500 BC, we often see figures like an older man leaning on his stick. In ancient Greek art, much like in life, this figure represents the peaceful passage of time and accumulated wisdom. You can almost imagine a grandmother standing in the courtyard, quietly pointing out the stars to her grandson, passing down stories of great heroes in the constellations. One generation naturally giving way to the next. It beautifully illustrates the timelessness of human generations, a cycle that continues tonight just as it did thousands of years ago. The crucial point to take away here is that we aren't focusing on massive battles, great politicians, or roaring tragedies today. We're exploring the unremarkable, peaceful moments of history, the quiet routines of the evening that literally hold the world together. Because ultimately, most human lives were lived exactly at this scale, just the gentle rhythm of another ordinary night. Section 1, the evening meal. This brings us to a wonderful ancient word, deyapnun. The deyapnun was the true chief meal of the day, eaten right at nightfall. It was the moment that gathered the entire household together toward rest. It served as a sensory anchor for the evening. After a long day out in the fields, working the olive groves, or tending the inner rooms, sitting down for this meal meant the hard work was finally set down. The rhythm of these meals brilliantly illustrates how the ancient day naturally leaned toward the evening. The day began with akrotisma at dawn, which was often just a quick piece of barley bread dipped in unmixed wine. Then came ariston near noon, basically a quick bite to sustain the afternoon's labor. But the day's entire trajectory was aimed right here, at the deepanon, at nightfall, the quiet, peaceful close of the day. So what exactly was on the table? Well, it all rested on what historians call the Mediterranean triad. This consisted of cereals, mostly barley, which grew really well in the rocky soil, along with olives, olive oil, and grapes, which were specifically served as watered-down wine. These were the simple, frugal, yet utterly essential ingredients that fed the entire Greek world. Imagine the tactile nature of taking a round barley loaf, indented into 4 parts, and just breaking it along a seam with your own hands. And speaking of hands, fingers really did all the work here. Forks were entirely unknown in this world, and honestly, they wouldn't even be missed. Before the meal, hands were simply rinsed with water poured from a pitcher. Then, seated on upright chairs rather than the reclining couches you might see at fancy banquets, the family used their fingers and pieces of bread to eat directly from shared terracotta bowls set upon high tables. It was just a very intimate, grounded way to eat. Now, it's also important to understand how the house itself was structured. Homes were often divided into 2 main spaces. The andron, which was the men's space, usually near the front where guests were entertained, and the gymnasium, the women's space, often located at the rear or upstairs. In many households, the deyapnon was eaten separately, with the men taking their meal first and the women eating afterward. This was just the settled, unquestioned rhythm of the era. It was just the architecture of their daily lives. Beneath the comfort of this ordinary evening ran the labor of the Oikos. The Oikos were the household servants, enslaved individuals whose largely unseen labor formed the quiet rhythm of the house. They fetched the heavy jars of water from the public fountain, tended the low fires, and ground the barley into meal. It's a factual reality of the ancient world that the peaceful evening rest of the family rested upon the ordered labor of these individuals. Well, the meals were usually pretty frugal. Occasionally, a small sweetness was made. Imagine the scent drifting through the ancient kitchen right now. Tigonites, or ancient pancakes made with wheat flour, sesame, cheese, and honey, sizzling in a pan. Just think of the comforting, rich smell of warm olive oil and toasted honey layered over the cool night air. A perfect, small brightness to end the day. Section 2. The glow of the terracotta lamps. Let's consider the beautiful simplicity of the terracotta oil lamp. These were just small clay vessels filled with olive oil, designed to cast a warm, steady beat of light. Think about the elegance here. The exact same olive oil that was pressed to feed the family at the dinner table now provides the warm light that will guide them into the evening. Let's walk through the quiet domestic chore that settled the house for the night. First, you carefully pour the olive oil into the reservoir of the clay lamp. Next, you float one end of the wick in the oil, letting it soak up the fuel. And finally, you light the exposed end. Just 3 deliberate, unhurried steps, and suddenly a soft, flickering glow pushes back the darkness of the room. As that warm light filters out through the open doorways, it dances across the courtyard. It casts long, calming shadows over the giant, human-sized pithoi, the clay storage jars holding the year's grain and wine. The light flickers against the silent wooden looms and their hanging clay weights where wool was worked all day. And over in the corner, the family's goats and a sleepy donkey rest peacefully behind a stone wall.
Section 3. A quiet, ancient night. The work of the day is fully set down now. In the kitchen, the cooking fire is banked. The glowing embers are carefully raked close and low. By doing this, a gentle, comforting warmth will hold through the entire night, safely, without any need for a burning flame. Everything that needs to be done has been done.
The wooden doors are gently closed. The little village sleeps peacefully beneath the endless Greek sky. Thousands of stars sparkle above, and the Milky Way stretches across the heavens like a pale river of light. The moon climbs higher, its soft silver light shining across the white stone homes, the silent olive groves, and the calm waters of the Aegean Sea. And it's truly wonderful to realize that this ancient, star-filled sky is the exact same timeless sky that you are sleeping under today.
Let these words serve as a calming anchor before sleep. The ordinary evening closes as gently as it opened, asking nothing more. The long night of the polis stretches out. There is nowhere you need to be right now, and nothing that must happen before the light goes out.
As we bring this explainer to a close, and the ancient terracotta lamp slowly burns down, I leave you with this thought. What quiet, timeless rhythms of this ordinary life will you carry into your tomorrow? Rest now. The room is warm, the night is long, and you have nowhere to be.
Welcome to today's explainer, where we're going to slow things down a bit. As the sun finally sets on the ancient Greek polis, a completely different, much quieter world awakens. Today, we're diving into a bit of bedtime history. We're going to explore exactly why the ancient Greeks lived so differently from us, and honestly, how we might just find a little bit of peace in their simple, daily rhythms. Now, our journey tonight isn't about those great epic battles or massive marble temples you always hear about. Instead, we're focusing on the quiet, unrecorded moments of a modest household. Because, when you really look at the daily routines of the ancients, you realize that life's truest scale is found right there in the ordinary. Just imagine it for a second. A warm Mediterranean breeze is softly drifting through ancient olive trees as the day's heavy labor gently comes to a close. The farmers are making their way back from the fields, the loud public squares are completely emptying out, and the village is just settling down beneath a sky that is about to explode with stars. It was this incredibly slow, beautiful transition from the blazing heat of the day to the cool comfort of the night. It's a natural rhythm that, let's be honest, we've largely lost today. Let's step off those narrow, silent stone streets and into a modest, everyday home. Now, these definitely weren't the grand, towering structures we tend to picture. They were mostly built of simple mud brick and wood, practical, grounding, and sheltering. Stepping through that doorway meant leaving the busy, noisy civic world entirely behind. You were entering a real sanctuary of quiet domesticity.
So right at the center of this evening was the dipanon. And the crucial thing to understand here is that this was not a rushed, eat-over-the-sink kind of meal. It was a slow, deliberate gathering that naturally transitioned the whole family toward deep sleep. Back in older Homeric times, they actually used different names for their meals, but by the classical era, the dipnon was the firm anchor at the end of the day. It was that exact moment when the tools were set down, the work was done, and the household drew together as the light faded. What were they eating? Well, these simple, earthy ingredients formed the incredibly comforting foundation of their evening. Because Greek soil is notoriously rocky, barley was actually far more common than wheat. So picture a flat, circular barley loaf, scored so it could be easily broken apart by hand. Alongside that, they'd have dark, salted olives and wine drawn from their own grapes, which, by the way, was always watered down for the evening table. This quiet frugality was usually rounded out by warm, nourishing legumes, like a simple bowl of lentils or chickpeas. Now, you might be picturing those lavish, extravagant banquets where wealthy men reclined on low couches. But for our ordinary family, not at all. They found their quiet contentment sitting upright at a basic, high rectangular table. They just pulled up simple wooden chairs. It was an unpretentious, incredibly straightforward way of eating that perfectly matched the grounded reality of their everyday lives.
Since the fork was literally unknown to them, fingers did all the heavy lifting at dinner, so washing hands wasn't just hygiene. It was a deeply ingrained, courteous ritual. Picture the soothing sound of clean water pouring from a clay jug called a prohus. A simple pour, a quick rinse, a gentle shake of the fingers. That clean water made everyone's hands ready to softly tear that baked barley bread and dip it into their shared terracotta bowls.
Okay, here's a really fun detail. Sometimes the calm evening air was filled with a deeply comforting and maybe a bit surprising aroma. The smell of tagonites, which were basically ancient pancakes. Imagine the rich scent of olive oil heating up in a pan, topped with the darker sweetness of honey just beginning to catch the heat, and then finished with toasted sesame and a little bit of cheese. It was this small, warm delight laid right over the frugal ordinariness of their days.
The actual physical layout of the house completely dictated the flow of their evening. The home was strictly divided into the andron for men and the gynoecium for women. Because of this setup, men and women in modest homes actually often ate their evening meals entirely separately, one after the other. The men would eat first, and the women would eat afterward, in their own quiet, private spaces. For them, it was simply the unquestioned rhythm of their world.
Now, we do have to acknowledge that beneath this peaceful surface operated the unseen, quiet labor of the oikotes. These were the household servants and slaves. They were the ones grinding the grain by hand, carrying the heavy water jars back from the public fountain, and keeping those low fires burning. The comfort of the free family rested entirely on this labor. It was this foundational, silent machinery that kept the entire ancient world turning, day in and day out. Deep within the cool, dark storage rooms of the house sat these heavy terracotta jars called pitsoi, and some of these were absolutely massive, like as tall as a human being. They kept the family's sustenance perfectly preserved through the night. The clay naturally kept the grain perfectly dry, and the wine and oil nice and cool. Just knowing these stores were full and safe brought a deep, profound sense of security as the household drifted off to sleep. Taking a look at the artifacts they left behind, you often see scenes like this, an older man sharing a quiet moment of wisdom with a youth. It's like a mirror reflection shifted in time. In ancient Greek culture, age brought a quiet, respected wisdom. It really reminds us of the slow, beautiful passage of countless generations, passing down life lessons just as surely as they pass down their olive groves.
It's kind of beautiful to think about, isn't it? The exact same stars that watched over this quiet courtyard watched over their grandparents, and they are the exact same stars watching over us right now. There is a deep, comforting continuity there. Whether it was the golden age of Athens or centuries later, that nightly routine of settling down, finding warmth, and seeking rest remained completely unchanged.
Right. So as the evening finally winds down, the last drops of watered wine are finished up, the scraping of clay bowls on wooden tables completely ceases. The plates are cleared away, and absolute stillness washes over the courtyard. All that busy, frantic talk of the polis has entirely faded away, leaving only the sound of the gentle wind outside. A warm, steady little bead of lamplight casts long, gentle shadows across the room. These terracotta lamps were actually brilliant in their simplicity. They were just a small reservoir of olive oil with a floating wick. And here's the best part. As the oil slowly burned down, the light naturally dimmed. It was a built-in signal to the body and the mind that the day was completely over and it was time to rest. Over in the center of the home, the hearth fire is carefully banked. The glowing embers are raked low and covered over, just enough so they don't run free, but they keep radiating this comforting ambient warmth that fills the stone and mud house until sunrise. It's basically the ancient equivalent of turning down the thermostat, wrapping the whole house in a cozy, protective blanket of heat. At this hour, there is literally nothing left to do and nowhere else to be. The loom is silent. Fresh water waits quietly inside cool clay jars for the morning. Even the flat barley loaves for tomorrow's dawn meal, the akrotisma, are already prepared. The ancient Greek mind could just completely switch off, knowing with total certainty that the basic needs for the next sunrise were already taken care of. And down by the harbor, the world is just as peaceful. The wooden fishing boats rest gently upon the calm water, their ropes swaying back and forth with the slow, endless rhythm of the sea. The fishermen are fast asleep, gathering their strength before they have to sail back out into the quiet blue waters of the Aegean just before dawn. Far away on the hillsides, a lone shepherd quietly watches over his sleeping flock. The only sound out there is the gentle, distant ringing of sheep bells drifting through the cool night air. The entire polis, from the bustling marketplace to the quiet domestic courtyards, has completely surrendered to the restorative power of the night. As this peaceful ancient world settles into the dark, it leaves us with a really fascinating historical contrast. The ancients didn't fight the night, they surrendered to it. So I want to leave you with this final thought to ponder as you wind down. In a modern world that is so driven by speed, artificial light, and endless complexity, what simple, quiet rituals can we borrow from the ancients to reclaim our own peace at the end?